watching live or listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Sunday morning Points of View show on Teachers Talk Radio. I think all the holidays are aligned at this time of year, so I'm imagining that most people watching who are teachers are just coming to the end of their October half term and ready for the next half term, which is often quite grueling, quite a long one, but I hope that you're all energised and ready to go. So we've got two great stories this morning. Our first one comes from a session in Parliament this week where one of the MPs, Rupert Lowe, who's an independent MP who was elected as a Reform MP, stood up and spoke about term time holidays. His view is that basically it's a school versus parents or state versus parents issue, and that parents should have a right to a certain number of days every year where they can take their children out during term time. He spoke about various other things, about inset days, and I think he made a sort of a vague reference to COVID as well. So I was really interested in this topic. Obviously, being in politics anyway, I'm interested to see what your point of view is, because obviously we hear a lot from parents that they believe this, they feel that it's worth the fines and things, but from a school perspective, how harmful is it, is the question. So whoever's ready to start.
Well, I'm happy to start in the absence of anyone else, but quite simply, it's utter nonsense. I'll be quite clear about this, Lucy, and the DfE were quite clear about it in their response. I mean, first of all, while it isn't relevant to the argument in and of itself, let's be clear. Rupert Lowe is on record as saying that teachers are foisting, a hidden agenda. They're foisting a political agenda on young people, and he is quite clearly, therefore, publicly, holding himself up as being anti-teachers. So there's an agenda here in what he was saying, which is quite different to the one that many people who think of this topic will be thinking. So I think that's got to be out there, because he has said that. It's a matter of the public record, so it's not controversial to say it. But the evidence base is absolutely crystal clear. The most disadvantaged young people are the ones that would lose from this. It would damage the very people who need school most. To take, one bit of evidence, if you miss 10 days of school, then at GCSE, you are 50% more likely not to achieve a grade 5, or in other words, less likely to achieve a grade 5. 50%, that's life-changing. Because a grade 5 is effectively the passport for most young people to A-level or level 3 qualifications of other sorts. Now, Rupert Lowe may think that doesn't matter, but I personally think that matters an awful lot.
I think I agree with you. So I'm not going to defend Rupert Lowe on this. I mean, my view is that it is not good to take children out of school during term time, because I liken it to watching a series. A TV series, and if you miss 2 episodes in a series that you're watching, then you have no idea. My husband slept through 40 minutes of an hour program the other day, and he had to rewatch it last night because he didn't know how this guy had been in somewhere in Poland and then suddenly he was in South Korea. Do you see what I mean? And so it does make a difference, and I think it's really important. I would say that perhaps Rupert Lowe wasn't in possession of all of those kinds of facts, so I suspect he was probably speaking from like I said, framing it as a sort of parents versus the state kind of argument, and a sort of the importance of families rather than looking at the long-term repercussions. And obviously, I think some of the issue that we've had is that schools were closed down in people's view very readily and very easily during COVID for very long periods of time. And so if it's okay for teachers to strike or for schools to be closed down for COVID, then I can understand why parents might say we cannot afford to go on holiday during the school holiday time because it's too expensive. All I want is 5 days. But the problem is, like I said, if you've got those 5 days, you've got 5 days off sick, you've got a day off because you've got a hospital or a doctor's appointment, or so, all of those cumulative days matter. And whilst you can more catch up in primary, it very much in reception and year 1 and 2, because lots of things are repeated and it's sort of, it's repeated learning to a certain extent. And I'm sure primary schools will have something to say on that, and I'm probably completely wrong, but I would have thought it's less harmful than by the time you get to secondary school, where that topic is covered once during your GCSE period and then revised months later, and that's it. And if you miss it, you miss it. And so I think there are huge issues with it. He also mentioned about inset days and how they should be taken during holidays, but they are taken during holidays.
Yeah,
so that's a week of holidays that they don't put in a chunk. They instead take a day here and a day there, and that allows for learning, development, for review, for new ideas to come in during the year to cope with the things that are cropping up during that year. So I mean, we've got Paul Foz Toffee Bluecast, who is saying, if the cost of holidays were reasonable, why would people be calling for the right to take children out in term time? I'm sorry, because I'm going to go on, and I know other people want to speak, and I'll be really quiet after that. But I have a friend who has one Airbnb that she lets out on her farm, and that's to supplement her income. And she said, we don't hike the prices during the holidays. She said, we discount the prices during the rest of the year because there isn't demand, and we are trying to get people tempted to come along and stay with us. So the idea that it's hiked deliberately, we could look at it in the reverse, and actually it's discounted. I'm going to let somebody else speak, maybe read this out.
Yeah, I'll read it. It says, no, unfortunately, they can't have that right, as there would be abuse of the right. So those who would exercise their right appropriately have to suffer due to those who lack basic self-regulation and impact their children's education and well-being. Sad. Yeah, I can understand. For me, I just think that it's a load of rubbish, and I think it's kind of playing into this kind of anti-school sentiment that parents generally have. And I feel like it's just like, trying to point score and trying to get as many people on board, or just throw out any kind of idea and hope that it will stick and enough people will buy into it. That's where I feel, obviously you can't really say what someone's motivation is, but that's personally what I suspect. That's where it's coming from. And what Carl said there, I agree. I think it's life-changing if a child's grades plummet, or they're massively reducing their chances. I remember when I was at school, we used to have assemblies where they used to show us this graph where there was like a link between the number of school days that you miss in a year and the GCSE outcomes you are likely to get. And it really stuck with me. And I can understand, on the one hand, as someone, I grew up with a poor parent who used to really struggle with how much more expensive it was to book a flight in the summer holidays compared to any other point in the year. And I understand that. I do feel like there are a lot of parents who do it because they often can't afford to do it otherwise. But I do feel like for Rupert Lowe, I just feel like it comes from anti-schools. There just isn't enough respect for schools, and for that reason, that's why I'm just completely against it. I think that schools should be something that is respected. It should be something that's a priority. I just don't understand why anybody wouldn't want their kids to leave school with the best possible outcomes. You don't need to sit on a beach or whatever, like, and schools generally are quite understanding if there is some sort of extenuating circumstance where a child needs to leave the country because of, a family emergency. I mean, as far as I've seen, schools are very reasonable when it comes to things like that. So, comparing your education, which you only get one chance at, to a holiday that, you'll have an indefinite amount of time to go to after your school years, which are a really critical window, I just feel like it's unfair. But I would say, I do think Lucy, I'd never thought of it how you just explained about the Airbnb,
No.
but I do find it really annoying how much more expensive tickets are in school holidays for families, children, even teachers or school staff.
Yeah.
Considering you get
annoying for us
no other
teachers.
time. Yeah, you get no other time. Like, you can't, it's not the kind of job where you can just book annual leave and just go when you like. Like, my brother's currently on holiday because he's got annual leave, and that's not something we can do. So, I mean, not so much. I feel like I wish it was more an argument about, could teachers get some sort of discounts or so. How like the NHS has a blue light card. Like, it'd be nice if teachers could have some sort of equivalent for holidays, or just for holidays specifically, because you can in teaching get the blue light card now, I believe.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, when I saw that, I just thought, yeah, anti-schools. I'll just read what that says. It says, it's quite surprising that we face these same problems here in Ghana. These same parents come back to blame the school for their children's decline in performance. Yeah, I think I can imagine. Like, I remember last year, one of my senior leadership responsibilities was attendance at my old school, and the drop in attendance that week before half term, I'd obviously never noticed it before, because I would have just taught, like a small sample of the children in the wider school. But because I was actually actively monitoring attendance, I mean, I feel like I always expected it for longer holidays like Christmas and especially summer, but I didn't actually realize how many kids just disappear because they've decided to go away for that last week of term. And yeah, I can imagine that irrespective of what parents decide, they probably will take an issue with the school if I feel like people very much see their child's performance as linked to their perceived quality of teaching or teachers and nothing else. Like, I do genuinely think that a lot of the time. So I think it's probably the same issue everywhere, but I do also just think if people valued education, respected it as, one of the most important and beneficial things in their life, I don't think it'd even be a question.
No, and that's one of my main issues. I've got two issues with this that infuriate me every time this is brought up, apart from the fact that I don't really want to listen to anything that particular MP was saying. Carl said he's got it out for teachers, so I don't actually care what comes out of his mouth. But the issue itself, number one, how can you not, as a parent, want your child to have the best possible future opportunities? And how can you not realize how important it is for them to be in school? And how can you put spending 5 days in some seaside town is more important? Like, it blows my mind. And I understand, like, there are arguments for, like, there's so many enriching things you can do with your kids on holiday. There's so many valuable life experiences that you can have. But then we get into that conversation of who gets to be the judge of that, and our middle class standards of, like, well, you're going to Barcelona for the week, that's fine, but you're going to stay in a caravan by the sea, so no, you're not going. Like that, we can't play that game. So it's a risky one. So how can you not want your kid to be in school? And secondly, all of this vitriol directed against teachers, as if we make these decisions ourselves, firstly. And secondly, we face the exact same problems. I can't go half the places I want to go because the flights are too expensive on my holiday. As Yasmin said, we cannot book leave whenever we want it. I've had to not go to my friends' weddings because they were during term time and I couldn't get the time off. We have the exact same problems. And I don't get to just swan off to Malaga whenever I feel like it because I want to go this week and it's cheaper. We don't have the option to do that. This is the whole system, and we're as affected. I would say more affected because I'm an adult and I should be able to go on holiday when I want to. I'd say we're more affected by the price hikes and the unfairness of it than the kids are. Like, we're on the same side here. This problem, this financial problem of term time holidays affects all of us, and it angers all of us as well, and it's not fair. So to pit us against families when we are literally in the exact same position is ridiculous and offensive. So it absolutely enrages me, because I would like to go on holiday too, but guess what? I have a job and I signed a contract, and your child also, their job is to go to school.
I
And
want to
you
say,
agreed
yeah,
when you went to that school to send them to school. So you signed a
absolutely.
contract too.
Yasmin, can I
Absolutely.
get you to hold your thought for 1 second,
Of
just while
course
I
we
talk about Hachette Learning? So this show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit www.hachettelearning.com to explore the full range of titles. And then Bet Show. So join Bet for the biggest week in education from the 21st to the 23rd of January 2026 in the Excel London, with immersive workshops, thought-provoking speakers, hundreds of hours of CPD accredited content, cutting-edge technology and unrivaled networking. There's no opportunity quite like it for educators. Get your free ticket today by visiting uk.betshow.com. Yasmin.
I was going to say, thanks, Lucy. I was going to say that there are also like safeguarding reasons for why, you don't want any children kind of disappearing on a school day. There are children who have, been flown out to different countries to undergo things like even FGM, which wasn't necessarily on the national agenda for a very long time. I think it was only in 2017 when it became a safeguarding concern, to the extent that you have to call the police directly if a child ever reports that to you. That's something that a lot of children have been victims to. There are loads of links to abuse when children are missing from school, things like county lines, child sexual exploitation. You want children to be in school all the time at term time, and if they're not in school, you need their parents or their guardians to be reachable. They need to be people that you can speak to get confirmation from them that they're not in school because they're real or for whatever reason, but you are aware of their whereabouts. So again, I just feel like he hasn't considered the safety of children. Yes, there might be children who jet off to Barcelona for a week, like Rae said, but actually, school is such a big protective factor. It's more than just, academia or the grades that you're going to leave with. There's so much more that school does by being on, that side of the school gates every day, and, being on a register every single hour, your whereabouts being accounted for all day. That has huge benefits for children beyond just their school grades. So, if we're in a position where, on like an ad hoc basis, people can like pick and choose when they're gonna get some, like book their children for some sort of annual leave, then who's to say you're not going to have people that are abusing or grooming children also doing the same? And I guess you could, I mean, I am aware as well off the back of that even in school holidays, I mean, there is no real time that children can necessarily be. There will always be times in a school year that they're going to be out of your sight and you're not going to be able to look after them in the same way that you would in school. But I don't know, I did also feel like it just didn't consider safeguarding enough for my liking.
I think children have always been at risk of various forms of trouble during holiday periods. The trouble has changed, like you say. County lines and things like that are absolutely terrible. It's not like scrumping apples in Mr. Doyle's orchard or something like in the old days, But kids have always had that sort of more higher risk in the holidays of getting themselves into some kind of trouble or not, and that is a job of parenting as well. And societally, we are in a situation, I think, where I don't think it's a problem to raise the question of parenting and how we've got a tranche of parents who are abdicating their responsibility, a state that's very willing, it would seem, to pick up a lot of those responsibilities and endorse them as something that's far better than the parents can do. And so I understand the premise of an argument, and I know what we've said about the MP, and I didn't want this to be a story about them per se. Actually, what I wanted to do is just to bring this up as a story, because it hasn't come up. I've not seen it in the months I've been doing this. I've not seen it come up, and yet I see it sort of spoken about all the time, particularly in the run up to the summer, where people start to look at those holiday prices and realize they can't go. So I didn't want it to be about that. And he is representing, all MPs represent constituents who will approach them and say, this is awful, we haven't been on a holiday. Now, we didn't go on holiday for most of the time when our children were small, right up until our eldest was about 16, really, because we just couldn't afford it. It was expensive. And we chose that. We made choices that gave us a big mortgage and things like that. So I'm not also saying that life is unfair. That's just a decision that we made. And for other people, that's not the decision. That is just their life. But what I would say is that when my husband, so he was in the Navy and he was at sea for quite a few years, and there were 2 occasions where we were given permission to take our children out of school the week that he came back from, we're talking 6 months and an 8-month deployment, to be able to spend time together as a family. Actually, it wasn't always the best idea in some ways. We'd have been better off having a few weeks living, just getting back to used to each other, if you see what I mean, in our normal setting. But there are times when those things are seen, when that family need is seen as important. And like Yasmin said, you know, if you've got a family funeral and it might be overseas or something like that, then that's understandable. But I mean, overall, I just think the principle of it, you know, even when you choose to be a teacher, you know, when you go into education, I am going to get some good holidays here, but I am going to work uber hard during the periods when I am at work, and I will not be able to take time off during that. We have to remember there are teachers who can't get their boilers fixed until the half term and things, because they can't take the time off to be there to let the people in and you know, supervise their dogs or whatever. So there are all kinds of problems associated with teaching, and those are some of the issues. And teachers have children too, and they would like to take their children on holiday when it's cheaper and they can't. So, you know, there's a range of issues. But the fundamental point for me is that it really does. I think people underestimate the issue with missing that just a week of school, and how many, when you're doing 7 or 8 different subjects and you've missed something in each of those, like maybe a big part of each of those, that really can hold you back and leave you at a disadvantage when you return, and everyone else knows it and you don't. So, and we spoke about AI catching up, didn't we, a couple of weeks ago? Could AI catch students up? And we all, I think overall, said that was not the answer. But there isn't teacher time as well. So it's not teachers just trying to take over. This is, you know, the role of a teacher is to teach the children, and if they can't do that, then it's a shame. And I mean, your stat, repeat your statistic, Carl. What did you say?
Okay, so this is, there's an equivalent one for achieving the expected standard. I've just had a motorbike there going past somebody. There's an equivalent for primary school statistics, but basically at secondary school, if a child misses 10 days or more of their education in a year, then they are 50% less likely to get a grade 5 in English and maths. 50%. Now that's not just it's not just a marginal amount. It's a huge amount. And that is career changing, and it is life changing. I mean, I think, and I know this isn't about Rupert Lowe and about the politics of it, but I think we do have to bear in mind that he was made an independent MP or he became an independent MP in April, I think, certainly late spring. He will be very much thinking, how do I stoke up debate and get certain people on my side? Because he's not going to party behind him, and at the next election that's going to be a problem for him. So he's probably doing this certainly with partly, I mean, I don't know, but I would have think partly that in mind. He's almost stirring debate deliberately, and I don't think we should play up to it. And I think we absolutely at the moment must stand behind the most vulnerable children, because school is a protective factor. If we say it's fine for the children of parents who can afford a holiday to skip school for 10 days, then what message are we sending about the importance of being in school to the families who, may not have the opportunities? I mean, it's just not acceptable, and all it would do is it would hurt the most vulnerable. And I think it seemed like we're all in complete agreement on this.
I think COVID didn't help. That's the problem. That hasn't helped undermining the importance of school.
I think this conversation would be the same 6 years ago. I really think it's different. But what I think is the same, because it has been for at least 6 years that I've been in education, it's been pretty much the whole 15 years I've been working here. I've had the same thing, although it has got increasingly worse. What are you doing to catch that child up? What are you doing to get? And my answer, if they've been on holiday in Thailand, is nothing, because I can't teach them if they are not in my classroom. I do not have the time. I do not have the resources. I do not have the energy. I don't have the give a toss to spend my time teaching a child that should have been in my lesson where I taught that thing to the class. What am I doing? Nothing. That's what I'm doing. And then the parents come back and they make demands and they blame us. Like, there was a comment coming up on the screen from someone about how those same parents that take their kids out come back to school and say, what are you doing? How could you let my child? Honey, no, you let your child fail by not sending them to school. I teach the children in my classroom. That is my job. What am I doing to catch your kid? Nothing. And I'll sleep well.
I was just going to say, off the back of what Lucy said, I think COVID, I agree, it did change a lot of things, although I think a lot of teachers would still have had this same opinion. But I do think it changed a lot, because after COVID was the first time that I was at a school where all staff were addressed and told that, the whole kind of lost learning, and even things like, the quote unquote fun lessons where you'd get to watch a film on your last day before Christmas, all of that stopped. I was teaching right up to the last 10 seconds of every day for a couple of years. And I actually quite liked it, to be honest, because I just felt like it created consistency, even though I'm not against that. I do like to, in the last lesson, kind of do something to, I don't know, make it just do something a little bit different for the kids. I do like to do that every now and then, but I did like that time because I felt like it was just more consistent, and as a result behavior was better, and children were just kind of more accepting of the fact that because of these really long lockdowns, they were expected to actually be in their lessons and be learning. So I just wanted to say that off the back of what you were saying there about COVID. But I'm going to move on now to the next topic. Let me just get it up. I think there was a report that came out. I think it was in The Guardian, but it was basically centered around isolation rooms. I'm going to open it. It was a couple of days ago now. It was centered around isolation rooms and this idea that they are zones of cruel punishment, I think it was, to quote it directly. And so off the back of that, there's been huge discussion around whether or not isolation rooms are fit for purpose, whether they should exist at all, and whether or not they're harming children. And as far as I've seen, it's really divided the opinion of teachers online, where many people are saying that they shouldn't exist at all and they're really bad for people's well-being. And then there are other people who are saying that they're absolutely necessary for schools, and they're an important way to enforce rules, and that one child shouldn't be prioritized over every other child in the class, and that teachers need it. It needs to be an option for teachers to remove a disruptive pupil or a pupil who just isn't following instructions for whatever reason. So anyone want to start?
Okay, can I start with this? Because I've I think there's a huge misunderstanding with what isolation rooms are in the vast majority of schools. I have never visited a school, I have never worked in a school that has isolation booths where you're in some sort of sensory deprivation chamber and you can't see anyone. Every isolation room I've ever seen is a classroom or a smaller version or sometimes a bigger version. And there are desks like there are in a classroom. And sometimes they've got blocks, sometimes they're facing the wall, but you could have 30, 40 kids in there. You get some rooms, you could have 10. It depends on the size of the school and the rooming available. But it's just another room with desks in where kids go when they're disrupting a lesson. So I'm not denying that isolation booths as you imagine them with the, some sort of thing blocking. I'm not denying that those exist in some schools. I'm sure they absolutely do. I've never experienced them, but in the schools I've been in where you have a separate room where you take the disruptors or young people who are currently being disruptive, then it's just a normal classroom, and calling them isolation rooms is incredibly misleading and sounds like makes people think horrifying things that are absolutely not the case. And the second thing about that, we have one in my current school. It was not being used properly until this year. It is now being used properly. And I think it's 93% of the staff in the recent poll said that behavior has improved. I personally feel like I can actually teach for the first time. I know that I'm supported. I know that I will be supported if I have to, as a last resort, remove a child from the room because they are not doing what they need to do and they're disrupting people. I feel for the first time in a long time like I can actually do my job and teach students, and 29 students are not missing out because of one or two. And it has been revolutionary. I said to a deputy head teacher a few weeks ago that my need to leave this career no longer feels urgent because I feel like I can go with this. The kids know that the rules are being enforced. They know that if they're kicking off and preventing the class from learning and acting a fool and being a clown, they know that when I click a button, somebody will actually come and collect them. They will actually be taken to that room, and it's not going to be party time. They actually will have to sit down and do something.
It's like sending your child to the bedroom, isn't it?
Yeah.
And no one's suffering. It's not a torture chamber. They're not alone with no human contact for 23 hours a day. This is not prison. It is just a room where they go and reset and reflect on what they've done. And most importantly, the other 29 students in my class can actually get on with their learning, and I don't want to walk out the gate.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right, Rae. And, the vast majority of teachers would agree with that. I think largely these debates are driven by people who, with the best will in the world, are not teachers, don't have to face the day-to-day reality of working, managing, a class of 30 or however many classes they teach. But what you would get if and I don't think there's any chance of it happening, by the way, but what you would get if there was some kind of legislation to prohibit isolation booths is you would get a huge increase in school suspensions, because the only alternative as a head teacher when you have a highly disruptive pupil to an isolation room or similar system where you take that child out of the place where they're disrupting the learning of others, the only other option that you are left with usually is then suspension. So I know people will talk about restorative approaches, and they'll talk about all sorts of more sort of emotionally based psychological approaches to, and of course schools do all of those. They already do all of those. I mean, some do them better than others, of course they do, but they do all of those. It's not like there is an absence of those or it's an either or. They're done a lot. But the simple truth is that if a child is disrupting a class or classes and is willfully and deliberately doing it, then those other 29 children or however many it is will lose out. And so you only have two alternatives. You remove them from the place where they're doing that harm, or you allow them to continue to do that harm. If you remove them, you then have two further choices in the immediate term. Either you put them in an area where they're supervised by education professionals who can work with them, who can perhaps address the issues that have driven their behavior in the first place, or you can suspend them. So if you didn't have isolation rooms, then you would have a huge increase in suspensions. And I don't think anybody wants that.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I mean, I note that some of the quotes from the experts that were quoted in the article. So you had a Professor Neil Humphrey who said, we need investment in positive behaviour support, restorative approaches and better mental health provision, strategies that keep children connected to their learning and their school community. Now, I think with all the best will in the world, you can put as much money into that as well as you possibly like. But I don't think you'll change the nature, for a start, that kids naturally they're pushing the boundaries. That is a normal thing. That some children have special needs, which mean that they can't cope in environments sometimes, and will have moments that are disruptive. That some kids are just worse than other children and get something from disruption. We often find behind that underpinning causes that are issues. And so I don't agree with any of that, because at the end of the day, it says that it keeps them connected to their learning and their school community. And I just think it's nice ideas, but it doesn't work. So we have to deal with the fact that behavior isn't all the same. And we don't live, I know there are some countries, I think places like Singapore, where behavior problems just don't exist. They just don't happen. Now, I don't know how, I don't know what they do behind that, and I suppose we could research that, but we're not going to change things just by putting more intervention in and having more nice people in school to chat with these children. And I just don't think that will change things. Another one said that they're an effective short-term solution for teachers dealing with disruption, and I thought, well, yeah, that's really good. That's what I want to hear. And then she said, this is Dr. Emma Thornton, disproportionately applied to young people in most need of support. Yes, it is. It truly is. But that doesn't change the nature that when you have some kind of disruption in your classroom, which can sometimes threaten the physical safety of others in the classroom, you can't say, oh, I better be nice, or because that child has needs. We can't do that. They have to be removed from that situation. Carl,
Well,
you want to come back?
if I may, sorry, Lucy.
No, absolutely, no, it's fine.
If I may address that point that Dr. Thornton raised, and it's a valid and an important point to make, but it's mixing cause and effect.
Yeah.
Because obviously those children are more likely to be disruptive in school. It is true. So let's address that issue rather than just simply remove the sanction. Removing the sanction is not going to resolve the matter.
Yeah.
The matter that's driving the problem that's driving their behavior is social and economic. It's deep rooted. It's not the fault of the school per se. It's a simple fact that with huge numbers of young people living in difficult circumstances and lots of problems that we have in society more generally, those young people are starting from a position where their behavior is already very challenging, and that'll be the case, and they will lose out in their education if we don't address that. It's not about whether we then put a sanction in for the other 29. And the other thing that's important is that if you allow that child in that classroom to continue to disrupt, regardless of the fact that they have special educational needs, regardless of the fact that they might come from a disadvantaged background, you damage the prospects of all the other children with special educational needs and disabilities, and all the other children who come from disadvantaged backgrounds who are in the class, who are doing their best to learn. So you actually achieve the reverse of what you think you're achieving by allowing them to continue to disrupt.
Yasmin, do you have any views on this?
I do indeed. I was happy to see that article in the news personally, because I have always had some level of issue with isolation rooms. While I was listening to you guys, like there's elements of things you've all said that obviously I totally agree with, and I think for the short term, I think that it is something that teachers need. I'll absolutely never deny that. As a classroom teacher who has always put a lot of effort into behavior management, any science department that I've been in, I've always kind of opened my doors to my colleagues and said, if you need to re-room a disruptive pupil, you're always welcome to send them to me, irrespective of any kind of like rota that we've had. Like, I completely understand the need to protect the well-being of all staff and pupils, and also the learning of the rest of the pupils. And so for that reason, I can't ever really say that I'm against isolation rooms. I think that would be unrealistic. However, what I would say I've always had somewhat of a concern with is the fact that a lot of the time there just isn't, in my view, enough kind of monitoring of those isolation rooms. And I don't mean physically in the room, I mean the kind of long term, like, how many times is a particular child going to the isolation room? I've had an issue with, just before this, we were talking about, we were all in agreement that we're against children missing any kind of, learning, but by taking holidays. And this isn't like me trying to dunk on anyone. Like, as I said, I agree with, elements of something you've each said. But for me, I just think, what I think about a lot is sometimes you could be at school, but also somewhat be excluded from school, if that makes sense. Like, you're not learning. And I just have an issue with how many times is a particular child going. So Lucy, the quote that you were just reading out, I really like that, because I do feel like there often isn't really a follow-up. Like, there's a lot of reactionary behavior management strategies where children might start on a subject report, or like a pastoral report, and then it might be escalated to a meeting, or there's just loads and loads of things. But like, at no point do some children ever really get taught how to like manage or regulate their behavior. They're just expected to learn it through the sanction system that a particular school has. And for me, I just feel like there's a lot more room. Like Carl was just talking about the social and economic deprivation, and how that could, feed into challenging behavior. And I don't disagree with that at all. But for me, the question it raises is, then shouldn't we be putting more effort into trying to teach those children who might not have learned certain behavior management or regulation strategies? I just don't think there is anything to learn from isolation. I will, however, say I've always felt like behavior is on like a bell curve, where the overwhelming majority of pupils will fall into the middle. They will follow instructions, they'll do as they're told. And I feel like for those kind of children, and one trip to isolation might be really effective, because they're likely to go there and think, oh, I haven't really enjoyed this today. I've spent lunchtime, break and lunch on my own. I haven't seen my friends all day. I haven't been in lessons. I'm not going to do what I did again. I think it's also really useful for times when there's like a fight in school, to be able to kind of remove pupils, and whilst you're investigating, or when you have investigated, to separate children. Or I think there are loads of times where isolation, or going to like, I think a lot of schools have some sort of variation of like what they refer to as some sort of either internal exclusion room, or like a behavior room, or like a reset room, depending on the school. But I think every school has somewhat of a similar thing. I know, Rae, that you were saying you've never seen a school with isolation booths. I actually went to a school that had those when I was there, and like, I'm still in touch with, I'd never been there ever. I had no like level of, I mean, I'd seen it. How it started was, I think my school was quite like, the school I went to, I feel like was somewhat ahead of its time with these things. And I don't say that in a good way, but anyway, I remember we had these, when you're getting like a new building, and then you get those like temporary porta cabins or whatever in the playground for like your lessons. So when they actually finished this, massive building that the head teacher had been talking about every assembly for like a year and a half, what then happened was, when they got rid of those cabins, they left like 3 of them, and they were all turned into like isolation rooms, like cubicles. So I think one of them was a classroom with desks, and the other 2 were like cubicles. I still have friends I went to school with who spent a lot of time there, and some of them still talk about the impact that it had on them. So again, another concern that I have is, even though I do feel like they've overwhelmingly disappeared, and it is now, as you described, Rae, often like I've been to loads and loads of schools to visit or for different reasons, and I've worked at different schools. Every school that I've seen typically has class tables and chairs, and at most the children will have to sit in silence. I don't have anything against them sitting in silence. I think they should. I think it's good practice. I understand it's part of the sanction. It's so that, you know, children can focus on their independent study. Like there's loads of reasons for it. But again, like I think there's so much variation, and I just feel like there are a lot of children falling through gaps, and they're almost excluded from education anyway. They're not really learning, but they're marked as present at school. And so for me, I just think there are loads and loads of positive behavior and regulation strategies that children can be taught. And I know, like, when a lot of the time, you know, when we talk about things like this, people say, well, teachers can't be everything, and I get that, but you know, I just think that, like, I will always just kind of be against the lack of teaching of behavior management strategies there are for pupils. I don't know, that's just how I feel.
Yasmin, you make some good points. If I may just address a couple of them from the perspective of a school leader. I know of no school, I mean, there may be, but I know of no school that doesn't monitor very carefully the pupils, the students that are sent to these isolation rooms. Typically what happens is you will have broken them down by a variety of categories, and you will know very much which people are going back regularly. And you're absolutely right. For the small minority of students or young people who go back repeatedly, then the system isn't enough. There needs to be a bigger solution. Teaching people how to behave is one of the hardest things to do when they have learned and become ingrained in behaving and thinking in a certain way. That's when your educational psychologists, that's when your social workers, that's when your alternative provision, that's when your counsellors, that's the work that they all have to do. And it's critical work, and it's really hard. And it's not easy to affect change. It really isn't. But it is important work. Of course it is. But that doesn't mean that the sanction in itself is wrong. And I don't think you were saying that, by the way. So I'm not suggesting you were. It doesn't mean that the sanction in itself. What it means is that for a small group of pupils, it won't be effective because they'll still carry on disrupting. So they then have to have much greater levels of intervention. But I'll be honest, I think most schools are very, very aware of it, and they do it a lot. How effectively they do it, well, that's another matter, but they do it a lot. So I would defend schools. I think the vast majority have thought this through really carefully, and they are genuinely trying to affect change with some really, really difficult, deep-rooted issues, which make it almost impossible at times for schools to operate normally.
Yeah, no.
Can I just, Yasmin, I'm
Yeah.
so sorry because it's
That's
you
okay.
I'm going to do it to again, and I'm
It's
not
okay.
deliberately doing it at all. But I just don't want to run out of time to tell you about Hachette Learning. This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development, books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit www.hachetteLearning.com to explore the full range of titles. And now you can carry on.
Okay, sorry, I thought you were going to read a lot more. Yeah, so when I say like monitoring, obviously I know like there are very strict registers in, you know, internal exclusion rooms. And as with all behavior data in a school, like it's not necessarily that I don't mean it's not like they don't have a record of like what's going on. It's more, I think it's just me speaking a bit shorthand. It's more that I just feel like off the back of that, like there's no, for example, limit to a number of times a pupil can visit that. And why I was saying, Carl, like you said a point there that reminded me exactly why I was happy to see this in the news, is because yes, schools do intervention. There is no school that doesn't do intervention. Like if we put those kids on the bell curve, exactly as you said, you know, it's the kids on the extreme end that will often struggle, and there will be a minority of pupils that it won't be effective for. And so that's just what I mean. It's more that the reason why I'm so happy to see this in the news is because I think there should be on a national level some sort of support, you know, given to schools to support those particular students that it's not effective for, because I feel like it's exactly those kind of vulnerable children who are falling through, you know, multi-agency gaps that end up suffering the most and having the worst outcomes. And I feel like it's those children whose well-being it impacts the most. And so for me, yes, you know, every child, oftentimes when I raise this, you know, people say to me, okay, but what about, you know, the learning of all the other pupils? Yes, they're important, but how I see it, I don't feel like I'm putting children on a sliding scale. I feel like they are all equally important, and that's why I raise it. Like, I don't decide who like, I don't change who I feel like, you know, deserves the most support based on off of their behavior. And to just respond to a comment there that says, are you saying the sanctions should change, or the lesson if they keep repeating the same bad behaviors? No, I'm not saying, you know, to say, okay, you've now reached 30, you know, days in isolation in X number of months. Now you're just going to stay in the class and it's for the teacher to put up with. I never think that a child who's disrupting a lesson should ever be allowed to stay in that lesson. For me, it's just more those interventions. I think there needs to be like some sort of national initiative to support those children, because everybody suffers. You know, I feel like all isolation does is it displaces the problem. You've gone from, you know, that child's disruption isn't just going to magically stop because they're now in isolation. Oftentimes it's the case that a child who isn't able to stop talking when they've been asked to in a class will then go and do the same in isolation. I've been on SLT duty in isolation rooms loads of times, and you will often find that there are children who are doing the same thing in isolation that they've been sent out of their lessons for. And so for me, it just displaces the problem. It's just moving. And, you know, like you said earlier, Carl, there would be a lot more suspensions if, you know, these isolation rooms didn't exist. And that's part of the problem for me. Like, yes, that's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing, because you've got a child who's now present in school. You know, the suspension stats are down, which everyone, you know, kind of avoids. But this child isn't actually, they're in school, but they're not really in school. Do you know what I mean? And I have an issue with that. And I feel like that for me is what I was focused on. I think I feel like I'm never really at any kind of extreme when it comes to behavior. I think there's always something I agree with that everybody says. Even when I was reading a lot of the stuff on X, there were elements of what, you know, some people who are like behaviorists or whatever they're called, you know, there were elements of what they said that I agree with. And there are some people that are like, have like attacking people with their views on the complete other end of the spectrum. I also, you know, there's elements of what they agree with, of what they've said, that I also agree with. But I think for me, it's more when I was reading this about isolation rooms, it was for that minority that it's not effective for. And so that's why I'm ever like hardly for or against completely getting rid of something, because, you know, like I said earlier, I think it's really effective for the overwhelming majority of pupils. And I think the way that school is currently set up, like schools need them at present, but when you know that it's not effective for a child, what are you doing? Like, I feel like there needs to be more accountability for that, because you've just got them present at school, but they're not really learning. Like, what child in a room on their own is gonna learn from a textbook and actually be able to keep up with their class? That they won't be.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think you're saying there needs to be more to it, that we need isolation, we need to remove children from those situations in order to help the classroom, but that if you continue to do that, if that becomes their experience of school, then they may as well not be in school at all. So what are we doing? And that's where that investment perhaps in that further support and things comes in. Rae, did you have anything more to say before we close up?
Just that I've seen that happen as well. You know, you have these kids that come in, and I mean, I'm thinking of one particular student of mine. I see him maybe 40% of the time in my lessons, and then he's missing out on stuff, and then he doesn't know things, and then he comes in and he's confused, and he probably thinks like, well, what's the point in this? Because I don't know it anyway, and I missed it, and I can't catch up. And then why would he try? Why would he, in his brain, the kind of person that he is, why would he try? I get where he's coming from. Sorry, guys. Sorry to interrupt you, Rae. Sorry, I just seen Tom's other comment. Restorative combo instead, he's commented. Look,
Sorry, I was just laughing at that. I just saw it now. Look, I love restorative conversations, but I will give you an anecdote, okay, about what I kind of mean. Like I know what you're saying, Carl, about teaching behavior is really difficult. I understand, but I feel like as teachers, we already do loads of difficult things. Like as part of SMSE and PSHE, there are times as a form tutor, I've had to like help children or discuss really sensitive and difficult, gray area topics. And as a union rep, time and time again, I've had teachers come up to me and say, I don't really feel comfortable, or I don't feel like I have enough training to talk about that. And so for me, I feel like it's possible. I feel like it's possible. And to just quickly share an anecdote, there was a time when I taught this year 7 class years ago. Like I was at this school that was really nice. I had this year 7 class where there was this pupil where from his first day, he was so disruptive. And it was kind of like a disruption that I'd never really encountered before. So what he'd do things like, I remember on the first lesson I was just teaching math skills, like it was introduction to science. It was, I think, during COVID, so we weren't really in a science lab. So I had to think of like a creative way to teach them. And I thought, you know what, I'll teach you how to make like bar charts. And so I said, you know what, go around and introduce yourself to everyone in the class and share your birthday month and go like tally that up, and then I'll teach you how to put that in a bar graph. So we made our bar graph and all the kids were like proud of it, whatever. And just as they finished, there was a kid who was like, I lied. I'm not actually born in December. I'm born in February. And all the kids start, whining like, oh, like my bar graph is ruined. And I just thought that is like really odd. But like, I didn't see it as like disruption at first, but it got worse and worse. It just kept escalating and escalating to the point where he'd always show up late to lesson. He'd just not follow instructions. And it's almost as if all the kids were like watching. And I feel like when you've got a kid like that, it's often the case that they ended up, as a teacher, you kind of put them at the front so that you can keep a closer eye on them or help them settle in. And so it's almost like you've now got an audience where all the kids are now watching, what is she going to do? And that can make it a lot more difficult. Anyway, what I basically made for him was this, I made like a personalized to-do list for him, where I literally just wrote a bunch of instructions in the first person, and I linked it to like the school behavior policy. So we were meant to be logging like achievement points and behavior points at a ratio of like 10 to 1. And I feel like Tom's going to get really angry if he hears this. And I did like have somewhat of an issue with it, because I feel like you can't really plan for things like that. But for like every negative behavior point we logged, we were meant to have logged at least 10 positive ones. But anyway, what I did is I linked it to the like behavior system, so like using the school language. And so what I do is at the door, I just give him a sheet. Like I used to print a lot of those to-do lists out for him, and he'd just have to tick it off. And it was just very literal things like, I will come inside and I will take off my bag and coat. I will write the date and title and I will underline it. And he just had to tick it as he did it. And so what I did is towards the bottom, so I put some in green, and then at the bottom, I put all the things I wanted him to avoid. So instead of escalate him through the behavior system, what I'd instead do is if he called out, or if he, like, there were just certain things if he was to do, I would like cancel the positive achievement points that he'd earned further up on the to-do list. And it was really effective. Like he was able to kind of correct his behavior, manage it. And eventually I kind of just integrated him. He used to sit at the end of my desk. And after a while, after about a term, I just integrated him into the rest of the class. And I even said, so-and-so's made it out. He's graduated from Naughty Corner. Can we give him a round of applause? And, all the kids were like laughing, and he was really happy. And he did really well. He got a grade 9 at the end of year 7, and I never had to send him out. And, I've also had times where no matter what I've tried with a child, it's just not worked, and I've had to send them out. So like, I'm not saying, that there are magical fixes to every child's issues. And I'm also not saying that as a teacher, you're always going to find the time to do things like this. But I do think there is a lot of room to help and train teachers on how to support their children with positive behavior management, as opposed to just an escalation, because I don't think that leaves teachers any happier either. It's not just the kids.
No, and of course that's right. And I mean, you can look at the work, for example, that Tom Bennett's done, Tom Sherrington's done. You can look at the work that Sam Strickland's done. You can think about Paul Dix, because they've all been very, involved in the debates over the last few years about all these issues. But one thing is plain: if you have chaos, everybody loses. The most vulnerable children, the teachers, and the other children. Everybody loses. So the answer to the problems is not to allow chaos to continue.
I like that.
I agree.
I think that has to be a good way to end this show.
Sorry, Tom's comments. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Tom's comments are actually killing me. What did he say? He said, "I'm angry, but I'm not on screen to be angry." And he said, "Need to wrap up soon, and me and Yasmin can have a restorative chat." Sorry, I just had to read these. Sorry. Yeah, sorry, Lucy, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, not at all. No, I'd seen the bit where he said we need to wrap up soon, and so I thought I would be good, because as a former naughty child at school, I'm now a well-behaved adult and I do as I'm told.
Is it because of isolation? Sorry.
Well,
I had
yes. I don't want to be in that. But actually, I'd love to be in an isolation booth all day. Wouldn't that be a nice thing?
Please, just give me a book.
Yes.
I think it's called working at home, isn't it?
Very much so. But look, thank you very much, everybody. It's been a really good show. So good to see you all.
Okay.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused